To disgrace the poor maid who had set her sights on his son, the millionaire invited her to his anniversary celebration. But as soon as she sat down at the piano, he always wanted only good things. Always. Even in those infinitely distant times when he first saw the long-legged, slender Licca. And right away he decided that she would be his wife and bear him a son. First him, and then as many daughters as they wanted. The first will be a son, and we'll name him Arthur, he said, gently squeezing her narrow, girlish hand. Licca laughed softly. Silvery laughter, long fingers, hair almost to her knees, like a silken cloak of a remarkable shimmering golden brown color. A mermaid, and her eyes are just like a mermaid's, huge, light, almost transparent. Like a quiet deep pool. You're a mermaid. A sorceress, he whispered, burying his face in her hair, and your eyes are like forest lakes. Deep pools. There are devils in such waters, she laughed. Aren't you afraid? I don't care. You've enchanted me forever. I can't leave. Be it devils with horns, demons, or angels with wings. It doesn't matter anymore. Licca wrapped her thin mermaid arms around him, pressing her cool cheek to his. She smelled of lilacs. And in those brief moments, there wasn't a happier person in the whole world. This is forever, he thought, forever. Then he was still young and didn't know that forever is a very unreliable concept. Like an unknown destination. It can mean anything. Licca walked around the house barefoot, and he admired her narrow feet and light gait. She never tied up her beautiful hair, and somehow it never got tangled. Licca was always humming something, and her voice was remarkably strong and clear. I wanted to be a singer, she explained simply once. I studied at a music school. I was praised. I was preparing for the conservatory. Why didn't you go? Oh, she answered gloomily and never mentioned it again. Arthur decided that something must have happened in her family. Maybe one of her parents got sick and she had to earn money. However, he quickly stopped thinking about it. After all, they had a whole life ahead of them, which they would spend together. And if Licca ever wanted to tell him, she would. His personal forever ended in a month. That evening he came home from work and didn't find his beloved there. Arthur, darling, I went to the store. I'll be back soon, read the note Licca left on the kitchen table. To the store, then to the store. She'll be back soon. Arthur happily shed his work clothes and got into a hot bath. At that time, it was his favorite, most reliable way to relax his stiff muscles. Working in a carpenter's shop isn't like unloading wagons, but it's still not a piece of cake. Sometimes you spend the whole day bent over, and by the evening your neck and back ache. But the pay was good. He could afford to spoil his mermaid with gifts every week. And he did. Shoes, perfume, a bouquet of flowers. A Sunday tradition they never broke. Right now, a new surprise for Licca was hiding in the pocket of his jacket, a silver bracelet in a narrow, velvet-covered box. Like a twisted grapevine, with tiny, transparent green stones scattered here and there, matching the color of her eyes. He would give it to her in the morning, on Sunday. Arthur smiled in advance, imagining himself getting up early and putting the bracelet on his still sleeping beloved's wrist. She would open her eyes, see the gift, and laugh her gentle, soft laughter. And then she would snuggle up, embrace him, and he would drown in her scent of a morning garden, get lost in the silk of her hair, and there would be no one happier than him. He didn't notice how he had spent a whole half hour in the bath, and Licca still hadn't returned. I wonder where she is. The nearest store was in the same building on the first floor. Maybe there's a queue? Arthur quickly dried himself with a towel and got dressed. If she's delayed, no big deal. He would go to the store, it's more fun to stand in line together. But he didn't find her in the store. That was strange. But where could she have gone, considering Licca didn't socialize with the neighbors? And she didn't seem to have any girlfriends. At first, Arthur was surprised by this, but then he decided it was because his mermaid was just too beautiful and otherworldly. Such women don't have friends, only envious rivals. But twilight was already starting to fall, and with it came real anxiety. Where on earth was Lika? What if something happened to her? There could have been a robbery, or she might have been hit by a car. There was a highway nearby, plenty of speeders. Wait! Why would she need to go that way? As far as he remembered, Lika was terribly afraid of crossing the road. Like a child, she always took his hand. No, she wouldn't have gone there alone. She must have returned while he was out wandering, thinking he got held up at work. She's preparing dinner. Yes, preparing dinner and can't hear the phone. Just in case, Arthur checked home again. Maybe they had missed each other. But the house was still empty. After another half hour, he was already running around the whole neighborhood searching for his mermaid. He kept calling her, fully aware of the futility of these calls. She had left her phone at home. But he still hoped. What if she had just returned and was calling him this very minute? She didn't call, didn't answer. Arthur was about to rush to the nearest police station when suddenly he thought he saw Lika with some strange people standing on the porch of a liquor store. Lika, he called out, not doubting for a second that he was mistaken. What could she be doing here, and with these people? She didn't drink at all. Never. She even refused a symbolic glass of wine on her birthday. Lika, is that you? The girl flinched and turned around. Yes, he was not mistaken. Alas. And for a moment, he felt scared. It was her, his mermaid, only now she looked more like a witch, smudged mascara under her eyes, bright lips twisted in either a smirk or surprise. Was it with her that he wanted his beautiful forever? Was it with her that he dreamed of having a son named George? Lika, staggering, broke away from the crowd of laughing vagrants and approached him. Unsteady steps. A half-empty bottle of some cheap booze in her hands. Here, she said sadly, raising the bottle. Some dark filth sloshed inside. In any case, it smelled awful. And so did Lika. Ah, mermaid, where's your lilac scent? What? He asked just in case. Why, Lika? The treatment ended, she giggled foolishly. I wanted to celebrate. I got a bit carried away, yeah. And who are these? Arthur asked, looking at her drinking buddies. How do you know them? Oh, I don't know them. She giggled again, glancing over her shoulder at her company. Well, we met at the store, just today. They are actually nice. He nodded dryly. I see. Lika smiled and went back to her new friends, while Arthur headed home, and all the way, as he walked through the thickening darkness to his apartment, he thought that his dream had crumbled. Like dust. Like sawdust. Either the dream was not right, or he was just unlucky. But he still couldn't fully grasp that something very important had ended in his life. Yes, that was the worst part. To understand that something had ended. 2 hours ago, he had some kind of home. Nothing special. A rented apartment with old furniture. But still, it was home, his home. And his beloved lived in it, his mermaid. And he wanted to live his whole life with her, their life together. And now there's nothing, no home, no beloved. And the ungifted bracelet case poked into his side, annoying him, as if reminding him of a pointless purchase. Entering the apartment, he walked into the room without taking off his shoes and quickly packed his things. He left the bracelet on the table, placing it right on Lika's note. At least she could pawn it, or sell it. Alcoholics always need money. He left the keys on the table and quickly left the apartment, his old life. And he sincerely hoped he wouldn't run into Lika. And then everything worked out for him, everything, the good-paying job, owner of the best furniture workshop in the region. And a good wife. Yes, Olga could be described exactly like that. A good wife. Though she didn't have Lika's mermaid hair, nor her enchanting eyes. No special bewitching charm. Shoulder-length hair always gathered in a neat hairstyle, eyes barely made up, clothes of restrained tones, comfortable shoes. She smiled often, but he never heard her laugh. Olga was kind of without excesses. She never yelled, never swore, but never rejoiced from the heart either. This made Arthur think that her feelings for him were moderately warm. But no more than that. The marriage was a beneficial deal for both of them. Olga, who at her quite young 35 years was considered an old maid by her surroundings, got everything she strived for: a quite successful husband with his own business and a hefty wallet, the status of a married lady, and finally, the birth of a child. Arthur, who never gave up hope of creating a family hearth, got a proper wife and a cozy home. And even the long-awaited son. George was born a year after the wedding. A cute dark-eyed baby with an adult-like serious look. Arthur laughed happily, holding his son for the first time. The boy turned out to be a spitting image of himself, and that fully compensated for the fact that Olga was a wonderful but unloved wife. And that she was indifferent to the child. No one could say that Olga neglected her maternal duties, no. The baby was always fed, dressed according to the weather, healthy. He spent enough time in the fresh air, and every evening his mother bathed him in a special baby tub with lots of toys. But Olga didn't dote on him, didn't approach him unnecessarily, didn't invent affectionate nicknames for him. She was more like an ideal nurse than a young mother. And when George turned 1, Olga left, without a farewell letter, without words, without explanations. She simply disappeared, and Arthur didn't know what to think. For 2 whole days, he didn't know, and on the 3rd day, his mother-in-law came and, sighing heavily, told him the whole truth. "Arthur, don't judge her," she said, picking at the tabletop with rough, heavy fingers. "Don't judge her as I don't judge, but don't expect her to come back. She didn't love you." "I didn't love her either," Arthur flared up immediately, "but we got along quite well. Marriage isn't just about pink snot, but also about reliability, respect, partnership. And what kind of nonsense is this, loves me not? Is that a reason to abandon a small child?" "And she didn't love George," his mother-in-law replied quietly, but her words sounded like an inevitable sentence. Yes, Arthur. Forgive me. I probably should have told you earlier, but I hoped she had come to her senses and everything would be different now. If only we knew where we would fall, we would lay some straw." "So," he said, slowly becoming furious, "so what do I not know? What did you hide from me?" She looked at him sorrowfully. Now her mother-in-law seemed very old and very, very fragile. Touch her, and she'd crumble like a poorly made snowball. "I didn't want to, Arthur. Olga asked me not to tell you, not to scare you." "I see. It started for her when she was young, right after college. Well, there was this guy, either a poet or a musician. I think he himself didn't know who he was. They met at a concert. She brought him home to meet us. I didn't like him right away. He was arrogant, dirty, greasy-haired, unshaven face, his eyes round and empty like bowls. But little Olga, she lost her head over him completely. She suffered for 2 years. He really got on her nerves. She kept repeating, 'He's a poet, he's a musician, he's a genius, and I'm his muse.' She had 2 abortions because of this muse. She helped him with money. Oh, what a shame it was. She borrowed money from everyone and had nothing to pay back. This genius needed money again. Her friends and acquaintances distanced themselves from her, stopped lending her money. So she started going to the neighbors. And they would come to me. 'Mrs. Marina, your Olga borrowed 300 francs from us. Do you know when she'll pay it back?' Pay it back? Sure. I ended up repaying her debts myself. She even saved him from binge drinking. He drank heavily. Maybe he used something else, I don't know. So she came up with a plan. She started drinking with him so that he would have less to drink. And besides, 2 drunk people understand each other better. And when he got drunk, he would start beating her. That was his stage of drunkenness. Once she ran home in the middle of winter wearing only a nightgown. In the morning she had a fever, and the bronchitis was so severe that I don't know how she survived. And what? As soon as she got back on her feet, she ran back to that dear drunkard. How could he manage without her? What if this genius of his had nothing to eat or drink? She bought food, drinks, filled a whole checkered bag, and ran off, her heels flashing. Arthur, I couldn't hold back and spit after her. I thought, it's true what they say, if you have no sense, even 100 diplomas won't help. And she was an excellent student in school and college. Top marks and a go-getter. And here you go, she found herself happiness. She forgave him everything. She said he was creative, talented. And such people have a difficult character, they're as nervous as exposed wires. Well, let him go treat his exposed nerves. She replied that no, if he's calm, he won't be able to create. As for me, I'd rather he didn't create but lived like a normal person. That's how they lived. His nerves were exposed, and she had abortions and debts. She almost died from the second one, Arthur. Missed all the deadlines. The regular hospital wouldn't take her, so she went to some shady back alley woman. Where they found such a person, I don't know, but after that she almost bled to death. The ambulance barely made it in time. She was lying in the hospital, barely alive. They caught that back alley woman, but what could they charge her with? No documents, nothing. She just blinked her eyes and said, I don't know anything, I don't know anyone. I'm a respectable pensioner. I don't do secret abortions. And I've never seen this Olga of yours before. So she got away with it. They questioned her a bit and let her go. There was nothing to charge her with. Olga walked along the wall for 2 weeks, and then I saw her beau hanging around the hospital. He trampled a heart in the snow for her or brought her a small package, 3 oranges. She, the fool, melted. He loved her. Look how he tries. Once he brought his guitar right under her hospital window and started singing like a spring cat. He didn't let anyone sleep until the orderlies chased him away. By then, Olga was discharged. And it all started again. He drank himself into a stupor. One evening he went to buy more booze, but it was too late, the store was closed. So he freaked out and started smashing the bottle display. Security was on him in a flash. They cuffed him and turned him over to the police. And how lucky he was. He got off with a fine. Of course, Olga paid the fine for him. She went to sell tulips at the market just for that. It was right before Mother's Day. Florists make good money on that holiday. So she worked 3 days in the cold, earned some money, and paid the fine. That was their incomprehensible love until he found himself a new fool. Arthur shook his head. His mother-in-law's terrifying confession made him feel sick. This is some kind of nightmare, he said with difficulty. Then I'll be honest with you, I actually felt relieved, the guest continued. I thought, he's gone, and it's good. Now, Alia will cry, grieve, but eventually, she will get over it. Life goes on, and spring comes every year. A young girl shouldn't be sitting alone forever, right? She'll cry and find someone new. But she didn't even cry. She just kept working. Every evening she stayed at home, reading books. For 2 years, she didn't go out, didn't meet with friends or go to the movies. I told her, you should go out, get some fresh air. Maybe take a vacation. And she replied, where to? I said, anywhere, go see new places, meet new people. But she didn't want to. She kept sitting there, going to work and then coming home. On weekends, she read books and didn't need anything or anyone. It's not great, but at least she's here, not drinking, not getting into trouble. And then, this unrecognized talent showed up again, as if out of nowhere. He started singing his songs about great love to her again, claiming he had realized everything and appreciated her. And Alia believed him. Not right away, of course. For 2 days, she was quiet and kept to herself. She would just glance out the window to see if he was still there. Seeing him, she would go back to her book, knowing he hadn't left. But she didn't say anything. Then on the 3rd day, he somehow got a bouquet. I don't know for sure, but I think he stole it. He never had any money of his own. He picked out the flowers and laid them out to spell Alia under her window. He wrote I love you on a poster and stood there with all this romantic stuff, waiting for her to look out. She did, and suddenly started laughing. I hadn't heard her laugh in 2 years. She yelled to him, "Come up." Well, I couldn't take it anymore and stepped in. I stood at the door and told her, I won't let him in, and I won't let you out to him. Have you completely lost your mind? Did you forget how you barely survived that so-called love of yours? And she pointed to the window and said, if you don't let me out, I'll jump. I'll go to him no matter what. I saw in her eyes that she would. I was scared. I backed away from the door, and she quickly put on her boots, didn't even fasten them, and ran to him. Instead of chasing him away, she started dealing with him again. And once more, he drank, she forgave, he hit her, she forgave, he took money from her and spent it on other women, she forgave again. No matter what you told her, she wouldn't listen. That was her love. He didn't even bother hiding his affairs anymore. He would bring other women to their place and tell her not to worry, that he loved only her, and these were just sources of inspiration. He would bring another one of his inspirations and, well, get inspired in their room while Alia sat all night in the kitchen. Then she'd go to work in the morning, or else her beloved wouldn't have anything to eat. She fell asleep at work a couple of times. Understandable, as you can't get much rest on a kitchen stool. She worked in an office where everything was in plain sight. So they noticed, of course. The first time they warned her, but the second time they made her write a resignation letter. So she was out of a job, with no money, and her beloved had spent her last savings. When he found out, he went berserk. He scolded her for half a day, how she dared leave him without means. And how was he supposed to live and create now? So he left her again, found himself another one. Probably one of those sources of inspiration. Alia saw her once. Said she was pretty, despite being a drinker. Her name was something like Lika, I think. So he brought this new one and told Alia to get lost. He was going to start a new life. She didn't even hit him with a frying pan across his shameless face. She packed her things, which fit into one bag, and left. She found another job and spent her weekends reading books again. A year went by. I saw Alia looking out the window again. I knew what it meant. I looked out myself. And there he was, standing like a statue with 3 wilted carnations in his hand. Probably stolen from a cemetery. But to her, it didn't matter where they came from. I don't care about your gift, I care about your love. She ran to him as if on wings, hugging this talent as if he had returned from war alive. Such joy. I wasn't even surprised. Maybe I got used to it, I don't know. And so he came and went 4 times. She almost got into legal trouble because of him once. What? How did that happen? Well, he needed money. I don't know what for. For a woman or for vodka. Olga was working in a big store back then, at the cashier. They sold construction materials there. She was in the wallpaper department. The revenue was always good. And then he calls. Help me, darling, I need 600 francs. She tells him, where am I supposed to find that kind of money right away? He says, well, go around and borrow from someone. She ran around to other departments, got some from one seller, some from another. She managed to gather part of it, but it wasn't enough. And that scumbag kept calling, rushing her. Olga was already crying, telling him she only gathered 100 francs. But it wasn't enough for him. He yelled to find another 500, or he'd be in trouble. He said he borrowed a car from a friend to drive around. As usual, he was looking for his lost inspiration. Of course, he was lying, as always. And Olga was like a rabbit in front of a boa constrictor. Empty eyes and believing every word he said. So she took money from the cash register and gave it to him. He promised to return it the next day. But of course, he disappeared for a week. Everyone at work found out. They were about to file a case against her. Somehow she managed to smooth it over. She begged them not to make a fuss. She was scared to death. She ran and took out a loan, returned the money to everyone. She paid off that loan for 2 years. Because of this, they didn't file a complaint against her, but they did ask her to leave the job. And, of course, as soon as she was left jobless and in debt, that talent of hers dumped her. Later, she got a job with you. You got married. I thought she had settled down. But no. Before George's birthday, she called me and said that Bloodsucker appeared again, starting his spiel about love. So what? Arthur didn't understand. Did she leave because of him? Did she never understand who he was? Is she completely stupid? Who knows what she was thinking? She just told me she loved him and couldn't resist. She said she'd leave her husband and son. She didn't need anything. And I'll tell you, Arthur, you shouldn't judge her because neither you nor I can understand it. There's something wrong with her head, I think. A normal person wouldn't act like that. Maybe it's for the best she left. Let her go where she wants. She's not fit to be a wife. Or a mother. She wants to chase love, not raise children. She was right, his mother-in-law. A wise, tired woman. Very wise and very tired of her daughter's antics. Arthur nodded thoughtfully at her words. Sympathy for this tormented soul overwhelmed him, pained him. Even breathing was hard because of it. Surprisingly, he didn't feel too distressed himself. Maybe because what his mother-in-law told him felt like a recounting of a very heavy, but still fictional plot, a movie about the love of two psychopaths. It just couldn't be related to the real Olga he was married to. Although he had heard that such people can pretend. Maybe you're right. But this doesn't concern you. Come whenever you want to see your grandson. And call me if you need anything. Olga reappeared in his life 8 months later. Very tangibly reappeared. She rang the doorbell of their apartment. She had keys too, but Arthur had sensibly changed the locks, so she wouldn't be able to open it even if she tried. This happened completely unexpectedly, when Arthur had long forgotten about her. He and George were quite happy living in their own little male world. Except the flowers in the apartment had all died, replaced by toy cars and boats. And the pink and beige towels disappeared from the bathroom. Men preferred other colors. Arthur liked blue, and little George liked everything red. Arthur went to open the door, sure it was a friend passing by and dropping in. Since becoming a single father, he had created an online community of such fathers, and surprisingly there were many. Some had lost their wives, others had been abandoned. They communicated, shared their troubles, even exchanged parenting tips, and, of course, became friends. It was no surprise. Everyone needs a circle where they are understood. At first, Arthur didn't even recognize the thin woman with a black eye standing at his door. Her hair was loose and wet from the rain. Now it hung in unpleasant, clumped strands. Her coat was strange, obviously not her size, and so worn out, it looked like Olga had pulled it from a trash bin. Wrinkled, with a half-torn pocket. "What do you want here?" he asked sharply. "Can I come in?" she asked nervously, quickly. Her hands were constantly moving, fiddling with the coat belt, then the buttons. "No. I came to see my son. You can't refuse me." "Really?" Arthur raised his eyebrows. "You remembered you have a son?" Olga pulled the button on her coat with such force it tore off. But she didn't even notice. "Don't start," she asked. "I feel awful without you." Arthur noticed her manner of speaking had changed. Olga's tone used to be calm and measured, but now it had turned into feverish babbling. "I didn't want any of this. It's like I couldn't resist. But now it's all over. I'm back." "Good for you," he replied. "Now you can go. Your mother told me everything, for which I'm very grateful. In a year or so, your lover will drag you away again, and you won't be able to resist. Sorry, but that kind of family life doesn't interest me. I came to see my son," she suddenly shrieked and lunged at him. "Let me in." Her long nails, more like claws, dug into his cheek, scratching the skin. He twisted his neck and bit her wrist. She yelped more from fear than pain and jumped aside. Arthur sighed contentedly. That's how it should be. Let her be scared. Olga slid down the wall and awkwardly sat on the floor. She twisted a strand of her wet hair around her finger, pulled hard, and then began to sob quietly. And then it hit him. Arthur stepped closer and looked at her bewildered, tear-streaked face. For a moment, he felt sorry for her. Where was the calm, confident woman he had married? Olga reminded him of a broken doll, thoughtlessly thrown into the trash. "Olga?" he asked quietly, surprising himself. He had never called her by a diminutive name before. Always just Olga. But now he couldn't bring himself to say it. This was all that was left of Olga. She didn't answer, just looked up. And Arthur was frightened again. Her pupils were huge, and the whites of her eyes were crisscrossed with red veins, like they were cracking. "Olga, did you take something? Did your idiot boyfriend get you hooked on something? Why are you acting so strange?" She nodded weakly and immediately looked away. Probably still somewhat conscious, she understood how she looked. Arthur took her hand. The same feeling of a broken doll, limp like a rag. "All right," he said. "I'll go get my phone and call a good rehab clinic. We'll wait for the doctors together, and you won't resist. I'll pay for your treatment, whatever it takes, detox, therapy, everything. You need help. The addiction will pass and you'll be yourself again. Okay?" Again that barely noticeable nod. "And here's the thing. I'm afraid to leave you here. You better wait in the apartment. Get up." He almost had to lift her off the floor and drag her into the hallway. She could walk, but her legs betrayed her, stumbling. "Sit down," he said, pushing her onto the couch in the foyer. "Sit here and wait for me. Got it?" She raised her inflamed eyes to him. "Yes." "Good," he said. "I'm going for the phone. I'll be back in a minute." When he left the room, Olga was already gone. But the small safe that Arthur had once installed between the shelves of the wardrobe was open and empty. There wasn't much money there, only about 300 francs. Arthur didn't like cash, but he kept some at home just in case. He smirked, now sure of the outcome, and reached into the pocket of his coat. Sure enough, the wallet was gone too. There were a couple hundred in it, but the wallet itself was expensive, custom made. Well, at least now it was clear what Olga really needed. Arthur suddenly felt that her appearance had been nothing more than a bad dream that, luckily, was over. He no longer needed to deal with his ex-wife's treatment, monitor her so she wouldn't relapse, or organize her meetings with their son in a way that wouldn't traumatize the child. As they say, thank God for small mercies. Olga never appeared again. Since then, Arthur avoided women. Sure, there were some fleeting relationships, but no close ones. Arthur, though it was hard for him to admit, recognized that he was unlucky with women. Twice he tried to start a family. The first, his mermaid Lika, turned out to be an alcoholic, and the sensible, seemingly balanced Olga was driven to wild actions by a bad passion, which was essentially another form of addiction. Only a person who could hardly be called a person. What can you do? With Lika, the secret magic left his life. And with Olga, the belief that spouses could be reliable partners. But perhaps it was decided somewhere above that each woman would take something from him. But there was his son George. The boy grew up quickly and delighted his father with his initially tiny and later serious achievements. It seemed like just yesterday he took his first uncertain step. But then came the victory in the Best Readers Contest. Then the Regional Chemistry Olympiad, where George easily took first place. Then the basketball team of the Chemical Biological faculty. And George was the captain and the head of the entire cohort, an excellent student. and this despite never being a grind. But he was quick-witted and thought creatively. Interesting. By that time, Arthur had gotten used to being called Mr. Arthur. The business was thriving and still generating good income. He loved his job, and it never bored him. Arthur sincerely believed that at least in his profession and fatherhood he had succeeded and was preparing for the time when he would become a grandfather in the foreseeable future. George, however, was in no hurry with this. The father had long noticed that his son was rather indifferent to girls. Too much time was taken up by studies and sports. And besides, the boy was used to constant female attention. He turned out handsome and self-aware. "I'm not in a hurry, Dad." That was the whole conversation. Deep down, Arthur was even glad that youthful infatuations and passions seemed to bypass his son. After all, he himself had gotten into quite a mess twice because of women, and he did not want anything similar for his child. Better George enjoy himself until he's about 30, 35, and then choose a calm, family-oriented girl. Maybe even 10 years younger. A smart, interesting man and a homemaker. A perfect combination. After all, there must be women in this world who can be trusted. So far, he only managed to trust one woman, their housekeeper Ksenia, who had been working for them for a year. Actually, Arthur had only 2 requirements for housekeepers: to do their job and to talk less. But for some reason, no one before Ksenia could fulfill these 2 quite simple conditions. Vivian, the first candidate, spent the whole day cleaning and couldn't cook at all. Her meat burned, spaghetti stuck together, and Arthur preferred not to recall her baking. He almost lost half his teeth trying to bite into one of her buns. Samantha cooked perfectly and cleaned quickly, but she talked incessantly and loudly on the phone with all her numerous relatives. Given that she moved around the house at cosmic speed, it soon seemed as if she had been cloned and was everywhere at once, without stopping her chatter. Molly, an angelic-looking blonde, had an astonishingly poor memory. She managed to forget to turn off the stove, vacuum, unload the washing machine, and close the tap. After she was fired, they had to pay for the neighbors' repairs and replace almost all the appliances. Desperate to find a suitable person, Yegor Petrovich turned to a reputable staffing agency. And there they showed him the resume of a respectable 50-year-old lady who was perfect in every way except one: she was determined to marry Arthur. "Your house needs a woman's touch," she declared on the first day. "You think so?" He smiled. "I hadn't noticed. My son and I seem to be fine with it. You're just a bachelor, so you don't notice how uncomfortable your house is." "BRR," she shivered, "and your son is still a boy. What does he understand? But I promise, as soon as I become your wife, everything will change for the better." Arthur thought the lady was just joking awkwardly and later regretted not firing her immediately because one fine summer evening, entering his office, he found the respectable lady dressed very scantily on his couch. When he asked her to leave, she ran to the balcony, loudly accusing him of compromising her innocence. The innocent and determined lady had to be fired. And that's when Ksenia appeared. She was brought by Arthur's former mother-in-law, who asked, "Take the girl, Arthur. She won't cause problems. She really needs the job. She has a 3-year-old daughter. She needs to be fed. Ksenia is quick and smart. You won't regret it." He looked skeptically at the girl, who couldn't have been more than 20. Her hair was tied under a kerchief, her big gray eyes were serious but not pleading. He liked that. "Can you cook, clean?" he asked. "Do you remember to unload the washing machine? Do you know how to turn on a vacuum cleaner?" She nodded. "There will be no problems with her, Arthur," his mother-in-law repeated. "No chit-chat, no scattered stuff," he said, frowning just in case. "You'll come at 10, change clothes in the dressing room over there. The task list will be on the fridge. Finish everything by 1 o'clock, you'll get paid and be free. If you finish earlier, I'll give you a bonus. Sunday is a day off. That's all." He didn't really believe this young girl with long arms and legs, looking like a grasshopper, could handle it, but he couldn't refuse his mother-in-law. After all, after Alia disappeared for a couple of decades, the woman had no one closer than him and George. And she so rarely asked them for anything, never complained about anything. Even the apartment Arthur bought her, so she could live in spacious, bright rooms in a good neighborhood near a beautiful park, she accepted with gratitude but with embarrassment. And she kept repeating, "Oh, Arthur. You didn't have to." "But I did," he assured her. "In the end, if you don't want to move, you don't have to. But you can rent out your new apartment. It will be a good addition to your pension. And I'll be much calmer knowing you don't need money. You never admit when you need something." "I don't need anything," she smiled serenely. "George is growing, he's doing well. And you, Arthur, too. I have nothing more to wish for." She didn't mention her daughter, and Arthur bitterly thought that his mother-in-law had completely come to terms with the strange, dark path Alia had chosen, abandoning her husband and son for it. Maybe, without admitting it even to herself, she considered Alia dead. Didn't he think the same? She was dead to him as the woman he once knew. What remained of her when he last saw her? An empty shell, a broken doll, and a wet coat. His mother-in-law also accepted birthday and holiday gifts with unchanging embarrassment. Arthur tried to be attentive to her, because after all, his disappointment in his wife couldn't compare to a mother's grief over losing her daughter. He felt obligated to take care of her. At least because there was no one else to do it. And now, when she brought this Xenia, how could he refuse? The girl surprised him after all. She performed her duties excellently, regularly earning deserved bonuses for speed. But there was something else Arthur couldn't believe for a long time until he had long noticed that Xenia and George had started playing a game of looks, and the boy stayed home more often, lingering in the kitchen while Xenia cooked lunch and dinner. He didn't give it much thought. Young people, nothing surprising about a boy noticing a pretty girl. Actually, this Xenia, especially if you dress her up and put on some makeup, is quite something. But one day, getting ready for work and passing by the kitchen, he heard his son's soft voice. "Come on, Ksusha, we've been together for a whole year, and you're still afraid Dad will find out." "He shouldn't know," the girl pleaded almost in a whisper. "You'll see, he won't like it. I'm not his match." "You're my future wife," George said firmly. "And we will tell him soon. In a week, it's his birthday. He'll be 50. We'll tell him then." Arthur listened, holding his breath. It seemed that his son's life was about to change in amazing ways, and he didn't even know about it. Of course, like any normal father, he wished his son happiness and was ready to accept his choice. But Ksusha was too much. George, with his looks, his brilliant education, his sports achievements, his budding career, and this Ksusha, a housekeeper who barely studied anywhere, and a single mother. What could she give his son? What happiness could she offer him? She can cook soup and clean the floors. She can do that. Yes, of course, she'll have his children, and that's it. Any woman can do that. Well, almost any. Vivian, Margot, Violet. So why settle for the first one you meet? Are there no other girls? What can he talk to her about? And in a year or two, when the hormonal frenzy subsides, will he still be interested in such a wife? He'll be ashamed of her. You can't take her out, can't introduce her to respectable people. Like Pushkin said, you can't step, can't say a word. You'll make a laughingstock of the whole kingdom. Oh, George, your head is hot. Although, you've given me a good idea, son. You've suggested something to me. Arthur cleared his throat and looked into the kitchen. Oh, Xenia. You're still here? In 10 minutes everything will be ready, Arthur, she replied, stirring the thick, fragrant soup in the pot. No. I'm glad you're here. I wanted to tell you something. Do you have any requests? She turned off the stove and looked at him attentively. Not exactly. You see, in a week, it's my 50th birthday. There will be a small banquet at a restaurant. My friends will come, and George's grandmother, of course, too. I'd like you to come. George can bring you. Me? Are you serious? Yes. I think you could use a break from work. Rest. And bring your daughter. Let the child enjoy the desserts, see the interesting environment. So, I'll be expecting both of you. He left the kitchen without waiting for her answer. This was the right thing to do. Arthur's plan was simple. George should see his beloved not here in the kitchen among pots and ladles. Here she is quite fitting, even cute. A domestic fairy, an angel of cleanliness and tasty, albeit simple, food. But let him admire how she fits, or rather doesn't fit, into the environment where he will spend his life. Let him see how she compares to those people who, like him, are well-educated, successful, and accustomed to expensive things. In this setting, his Ksusha will inevitably appear in her true light. A plain, gray mouse, awkward and dull. Just as she really is. If the boy isn't stupid, and he's far from stupid, he'll quickly figure it out and suggest to the cute housekeeper to stay friends. See how everything is falling into place, he heard George's muffled voice. Arthur smirked. Yes, son, it really was fortunate. He hadn't anticipated any of his 50 birthdays with such eagerness. In fact, he hadn't been particularly keen on celebrating it at all. Work was hectic, and besides, he thought 50 was suddenly a lot. One has to get used to each new decade. When you turn 20, you're already a serious young man, no longer a child. Then 30, when it's time to seriously consider starting a family. At 40, most have established careers and are financially stable. But at 50, what should a person have by 50? Arthur hadn't found a clear answer to this question yet, and that made him uneasy. He hated uncertainty, but his friends persuaded him to celebrate his jubilee, and he didn't want to disappoint them. Especially now, when it was crucial to show George the girl he had chosen for his wife. Arthur's friends had grown-up daughters around George's age. And many of their wives could easily compete with their daughters, beautiful, well-groomed, impeccably mannered women in expensive evening dresses. An elegant setting was just what was needed to finally open George's eyes. As for Ksusha, well, the joke would be cruel on her. Although, she likely wouldn't understand why she was invited. She was probably not smart enough to figure it out. Let her just sit at the table and try the exotic dishes. Maybe she'll take an interest in a new recipe. That would be enough. She might even be grateful for the invitation. But George must understand that cutie is out of his league. That's what mattered most. That evening, Arthur smiled as he greeted the guests, thanking them for accepting his invitation. Slender and fit, in a perfectly tailored suit, holding a glass of champagne, he looked no more than 40. But he didn't feel festive at all. George still hadn't shown up, and Arthur was starting to doubt he would come at all. What if that silly Ksusha was sharper than he thought? She might have figured out what was going on and refused to come, convincing George not to as well. Arthur glanced anxiously at the entrance, but George was still absent. He'll come, said his mother-in-law quietly, who was sitting next to the jubilarian. She had noticed his anxiety and repeated gently, "He'll come, George. He called me this morning, asking if he should order a bouquet of flowers or not. Maybe he won't come." Arthur sighed and took a sip of champagne. "I think I made a mistake. Let everything be as it will." "What now?" "You see, But his mother-in-law wasn't listening. She was looking at the entrance to the banquet hall. Arthur followed her gaze and saw George. His son, tall and handsome, with a relaxed gait and a beaming smile, was heading straight towards him. But beside him was not Ksusha. George had a young beauty in a red dress on his arm. Luxurious dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, highlighting her fair skin, and her large gray eyes looked straight ahead, without challenge. Arthur liked that. But those large gray eyes. Where had he seen them before? He had seen them, indeed. "Happy birthday, Dad," George said. "Sorry, Ksusha and I are a bit late." With Xusha. So, it was her after all. Arthur froze, examining the beauty. Could this really be the plain girl who came to clean and cook 6 times a week? Well, she did hide her hair under a kerchief, but the face, the walk. Or was it just the beautiful dress and makeup that had transformed her? I wanted to tell you today, George said. Ksenia and I decided to get married. I hope you'll be happy for us. Me? Xusha smiled. I couldn't think of a suitable gift for you on such a day, so I decided. Would you allow me? She walked over to a small stage in the corner of the hall and opened the lid of the piano. Her fingers quickly and gently ran over the keys. I would like, she said, playing the first chord, to give you a song. George smiled encouragingly at her, and Ksenia sang with such a pure, strong voice that Arthur had never heard before. Except maybe. And where do you know this girl from? He asked hoarsely to his mother-in-law, who seemed not at all surprised by what was happening. Arthur, she replied wearily, I didn't tell you, but Olga came to see me again. With Ksenia, who wasn't even 2 at the time. Xusha was the daughter of that unfinished musician who fathered her with his new muse. Remember I told you? With Vita. Lika, he corrected her automatically. Now he was no longer in doubt. It was Lika. Oh, right, said the mother-in-law, I couldn't remember. She was Lika. Beautiful. Olga said she looked like a mermaid. Her hair was long, very long, and she was light, thin. It's a pity. So, this Lika also drank a lot and drowned in the river while drunk. And the daughter, well, what about her? Nobody needed her. Talent didn't want her, you know what he was like. He wanted to send the little one to an orphanage. He even gathered all the documents. He was happy to get rid of the burden. But Alia, she felt sorry for the girl. She brought her to me. Said, I'm beyond help, so let her be like a daughter to you. Maybe you can make something of her if you couldn't with me. She said that and went back to her man. I never saw her again. I don't even know if she's alive. Like she vanished into thin air. So, I raised Ksenia myself. Got guardianship as required. But I was afraid to tell you. Thought you'd get mad and forbid me from seeing my grandson. She sang well since childhood, was a top student in music school. But she fell in love early. Well, that's fate. What can you do? Don't think badly, Arthur. Her husband was a good man, hardworking, kind. Loved Ksenia very much. And was so happy about their daughter. He'd come home from work and never let her out of his arms. Told her stories, sang songs. And the little one would coo and smile in his arms. He always said when their daughter grew a bit, Ksenia should go to the conservatory. She should be a singer with such a voice. He was a very good man. But he died after 2 years. He was a builder. Fell from a great height and died. It was such a tragedy. Ksenia worked hard to earn money. She washed floors, sold at the market. Took any job. And then she came to you. And now George loves her. And she loves him. Maybe this is for the best. Yes, I wasn't ready for this. Arthur loosened his tie. It suddenly started chafing his neck. Some mineral water, please, he asked almost plaintively, and his son immediately handed him a full glass. And I, Arthur, think this, said the mother-in-law, my Olga, she turned out to be wayward, neither a mother nor a wife. But your son, George, look at him, he's a good, smart boy. Kind and handsome. That's how it happens. And Ksenia too. Her parents, well, you know. But they had a good girl, a beauty. A caring mother, with such a voice. I think sometimes life can turn out so that someone starts off unlucky, but then everything turns out well. Don't doubt, Arthur, they'll have a strong family. And they will bring you joy many times. Arthur sighed. In some ways, his kind, wise mother-in-law was right. The ghosts of the past flitted by like a kaleidoscope. Lika, his mermaid, who found her death in the river, Olga with her desperate love. They brought him many disappointments, but also gave him a great treasure, George. And now this beautiful, endlessly talented girl, who seemed to appear out of nowhere. And it's for the best, all for the best. Meanwhile, Ksenia finished singing and stood up from the piano. Arthur was the first to rise from his seat and applaud loudly. "I am happy to announce, my friends," he said, "that this beautiful stranger is my son George's fiancée. Please welcome Ksenia." And the hall erupted in applause.